You hear it before you see it. A low, heavy droning right at the eaves of the barn on a warm morning in May. You step outside with your coffee, and there they are. Big black bees, fat as your thumb, hovering in front of the wood like they own it. One flies straight at your face. You swat at it, and it just hangs there in the air staring at you. Your first thought is, those are bumblebees. They are harmless. That is the mistake that cost you a barn beam, because those are carpenter bees. While you are standing there, the female is above your head turned upside down, drilling a hole into your wood as clean and round as a drill bit. She does not eat the wood. She bores into it, turns and tunnels along the grain. 8 inches one way, sometimes 8 the other, laying her eggs. The wood you raised hollowing out a little more every spring. What do folks do today when they realize the danger? They panic. They call a commercial service that charges hundreds of dollars to spray synthetic chemical foam into the rafters. Or they buy those little wooden box traps that catch a few bees while dozens more tunnel behind them. Why do we look for the most expensive, complicated answer first? How did the old people keep their barns standing for 2 centuries without a monthly subscription to an exterminator? Stop and think about that. They did not have chemical corporations, yet the oak and pine beams in our valleys survived generations. I am Elias. My family came from the Palatinate in 1838, and we have farmed this same ground in Lancaster County ever since. I will tell you plainly, carpenter bees are a pest where the damage you cannot see is far worse than what you can. Today I am going to show you how the old people dealt with this. How to kill the ones already in the wood, kill the eggs in the tunnels, seal the holes so they cannot dig back out, and protect the timber so they never start again. No company, no monthly service, no fancy chemical that costs more than the board it is sprayed on. The old way by your own hand. Let me start with the thing nobody tells you. The bee flying at your face is not the problem. It is just the part you can see. The real problem is the tunnel you cannot see. I learned this from my grandfather on the south wall of the old wagon shed when I was 10. I wanted to swat them, but he said, "Elias, you are looking at the wrong thing." He walked me to the wall and pointed below the holes. There were long yellow-brown stains running down the wood like somebody had dripped tobacco juice down the boards. That stain is their leavings. The sawdust and waste pushed out of the hole and run down by the rain. Find the stain, and right above it, you will find a whole board clean into the board, perfectly round, about the size of your little finger. Here is why that matters. You can kill every bee flying today and feel like you won. But next spring, a whole new batch comes right back out because the eggs were never touched. The bees in the air are this year. The eggs in the wood are next year. If you only deal with what you can see, you fight the same war every spring. Understand this. The whole pest trade runs on treating the visible part and leaving the invisible. The old method is built around the tunnel, not the bee. 4 steps in order. Kill what is in the tunnel. Plug it so they cannot redig. Patch the wood. Then protect all the timber so they never bore fresh. Miss a step and you have wasted your morning. Before we touch a single hole, you walk the property. This is the step everyone skips, yet it decides whether this works. Take a slow walk around the barn, the pole shed, the fence rails, anywhere there is wood facing the sun that has gone soft and gray with weather. Carpenter bees love bare, weathered, unfinished softwood. They want it dry, soft, and bare. Walk, look low for the stains, look up for the holes, and listen. On a still day, you can put your ear near a beam and hear them working inside. A faint rhythmic rasping, like a tiny saw blade chewing dry fibers. Mark every hole you find with chalk or tape. You think you have 3 holes and you will find 15. Find them all first. Now to the remedy. The common way now is a can of synthetic foam insecticide. It works, but it leaves a chemical residue and costs money every season. In my community, we lean on what we can do with our own hands. The older way uses a dry mineral powder, diatomaceous earth. It is a soft white earth dug from the ground that feels like flour. But under a lens, it is made of microscopic, ancient shells, sharp as broken glass to any insect that crawls through it. It cuts their outer coating and dries them out. Puffed deep into the tunnel, it sits there. It does not rot, and since it is inside a dry gallery, rain cannot wash it away. Let me be straight with you, because I would rather you trust me than be impressed by me. This old powder method has its honest limits. It works flawlessly where the tunnel is straight or shallow. But these insects are clever engineers. They turn sharp corners and tunnel deep into the grain. If a tunnel curves too far back, powder might not reach the back chamber, where the oldest eggs are nestled. Modern agricultural extensions have studied these galleries and confirmed what my grandfather knew. If you do not reach the back of the nest, the larvae hatch and chew their way out next April. If a tunnel is too deep and curved, you must adapt, using a targeted treatment that flows around those corners to guarantee you strike the eggs at the very back. This brings us to the moment of execution. You have walked the perimeter, marked the tobacco stains, and have your materials ready. The sun is dipping below the tree line. The air is cooling, and the heavy droning has finally stopped because every bee has returned to its hole for the night. They are inside, quiet and still. This is the exact moment when the work begins, and if you do it wrong, you will trap them inside and force them to destroy a perfectly good beam just to escape. Let me show you exactly how we prepare the tools, how we inject the tunnels safely, and the specific way we pack the opening so no jaw can ever chew through it again. The twilight is deep now, and the valley has gone quiet. The heavy, irritating drone at the eaves has ceased, because every bee has returned to the safety of its hole for the night. They are inside, quiet and still, huddled together in the dark of those hand-drilled tunnels. This is the exact moment when the work begins. Let us walk over to the workbench and gather what we need. First is our primary agent, the diatomaceous earth. Look at it closely under the lantern light. It is as white as wood ash, completely dry, and has absolutely no smell. When you rub a pinch between your thumb and forefinger, it feels as soft and harmless as talcum powder or flour. But understand this. To an insect with a brittle outer shell, this powder is a corridor of broken glass. For the application, you do not need an expensive apparatus. A simple handheld rubber powder duster with a long, thin brass nozzle is what I use. If you do not have one, an old plastic dish soap bottle, thoroughly washed and dried, with a short piece of stiff straw taped tightly to the tip, works just fine. You want a tool that compresses quickly to create a sharp, sudden burst of air. Now, for those deep, curved galleries where the wood grain turns a sharp corner, we must prepare our alternative. If you have chosen to use a liquid borer treatment for those unreachable chambers, you will notice it behaves differently. It is a clear, amber fluid with a sharp medicinal odor that catches slightly in the back of your throat. Its consistency is oily, designed specifically to cling to the inner walls of the timber rather than running straight out of the hole like water. Before you crack that bottle, pull on your heavy leather work gloves and a pair of clear safety spectacles. The old ways teach us respect for our tools, and that includes the ones that come from a store. Step up to the first marked timber, right above that tobacco-colored stain we found earlier. Take the brass nozzle of your duster and insert it straight into the mouth of the opening. Do not just hold it against the surface. Push that metal tip an inch or two right into the throat of the tunnel. Now give the bulb one firm, deliberate squeeze. You will hear a soft, hollow huff echo inside the timber. When you pull the nozzle back, a tiny ghost of white powder will drift out of the hole and settle on the gray wood. That tells you the air pressure has successfully carried the dust deep into the horizontal gallery. If you are using the liquid alternative for a winding hole, insert the thin plastic straw until it bottoms out against the curve. Then give the valve a short, half-second press. You will smell that chemical tang immediately as the oil coats the wood. Here is where the first-time practitioner makes a critical mistake. You see the dust inside, you feel a sense of accomplishment, and your hand reaches automatically for the filler to seal the hole. Stop and think. If you close that door tonight, you are trapping a living bee inside a dark tomb. A carpenter bee has jaws designed to excavate seasoned timber. If she is blocked, she will simply turn around and begin chewing a brand new tunnel through the clean, solid wood right next to your patch to make an escape door. By tomorrow noon, you will have a fresh hole and double the structural damage. We leave treated holes completely open for a full 48 hours. Why? Because the bees that were out foraging when the sun went down need to come home. They must crawl through that white dust, coating their legs and bellies, carrying the remedy deep into the nursery chambers where your tools could never reach. Let the natural habits of the pest finish the job for you. After 2 days have passed, the activity around the holes will have vanished. Now, we seal the throat. Walk to your scrap box and pull out a handful of medium-grade steel wool or a copper scouring pad. Copper is excellent, because it will never rust or leave an ugly red streak down a light pine board. But standard steel wool is what our grandfathers always had on hand. Take your shears and cut a piece about 2 inches long and 1 inch wide. Roll it firmly between your palms, compressing it until it forms a dense, gray little cocoon that feels rough and prickly against your skin. Take a heavy common nail or a wooden dowel, slightly smaller than the hole, and push that metal plug straight into the throat of the boring. Shove it past the surface until it sits about 1/4 inch deep inside the wood. Pack it tight, like an old musket ball. When a wandering bee tries to reclaim this tunnel later in the summer, her jaws will strike that metal mesh. Her teeth will slide right off the steel, stopping her cold. The final step is the patch and finish, the part that makes the repair permanent and invisible. The old-timers used a paste made from fine pine sawdust mixed with boiled linseed oil, stirred until it reached the consistency of thick peanut butter. It smells beautifully of a warm woodshop in July. If you are using a modern store-bought filler, choose a solvent-based wood patch that dries hard and accepts a finish. It should feel heavy and doughy on your trowel. Scoop a small dollop onto the tip of your putty knife and press it firmly into the opening, right over the steel wool plug. Pack it until it overfills the hole slightly, leaving a small mound to account for shrinkage as it cures. Leave it to sit until the following morning. When you return, the patch will be rock hard and pale. Take a piece of 80 grit sandpaper and run it flat over the spot with steady, rhythmic strokes until the patch is perfectly flush with the surrounding grain. Run your bare fingers over the wood. You should feel nothing but a smooth, continuous surface. Now dip your brush and coat that spot with paint, stain, or oil to match the rest of the timber. Once that face is sealed and hardened, the wood loses its gray, weathered appeal. The old road is closed forever, and the invitation for a new generation of borers has been officially withdrawn. Now that the workbench is clear and the dust has settled, let us pull up a couple of old milk crates and look at the why of what we just did. A traditional craft survives only if it is rooted in truth. The old people did not have microscopes or laboratory reports, but they had eyes that observed closely, and they had the long memory of trial and error. Today, modern agricultural schools have tested these old remedies in their laboratories, and what they found under their lenses is the exact same reality my grandfather saw on the south wall of the wagon shed. Understand this. The white powder we used, that diatomaceous earth, is not a poison. If you leave a can of synthetic chemical spray out in the sun, it breaks down and loses its teeth within a few weeks. But this mineral powder operates on a completely different principle. It is mechanical, not chemical. Millions of years ago, certain tiny, microscopic creatures lived in the water. When they died, their hard shells settled to the bottom and turned to stone, which we now dig up and grind into flour. To our skin, it is soft. But to an insect, it is a field of infinitely small, razor-sharp glass shards. Every insect, including the carpenter bee, relies on a very specific design to stay alive. They do not have skin like ours. They have a hard outer shell. To keep their internal moisture from evaporating into the dry air, nature coats that outer shell with a microscopic layer of oil and wax. Think of it like a piece of oiled leather. As long as the oil is there, the water stays inside. When a bee crawls through that white powder, those microscopic shards scratch and scrape that thin wax layer away. It does not poison the bee, it dries the bee out from the inside. Because it is a mechanical action, an insect can no longer build up a resistance to it than a man can build up a resistance to a sharp knife. It works every single time, provided the insect physically makes contact with it. The same simple science applies to the paintbrush. Why do these bees choose the bare, gray eaves of your barn instead of the living trees in the woodlot? Stop and think about it. A living tree is full of sap and moisture, which floods a tunnel and drowns the young. A painted or oiled board is blocked by a solid polymer, a skin of cured oil or pigment that seals the pores of the timber. But a bare, weathered board has been beaten by the sun and rain for 10 years. The UV rays of the sun break down the natural glue inside the wood fibers, a substance scientists call lignin. When that glue washes away, the wood becomes soft, gray, and brittle on the surface. To a female carpenter bee, that weathered surface is an open door. Her jaws can shred those degraded fibers with ease. By applying a coat of linseed oil or paint, you are not just hiding the wood, you are replacing that lost glue, hardening the face of the timber, and sealing the pores so she cannot get a foothold to begin her work. But let me be entirely honest with you now, because an honest practitioner must show you the boundaries of his craft. This old method is an excellent shield, but it is not a magic spell. There are specific places where it works beautifully, and there are places where it will fail you completely. First, this method works only on seasoned softwoods, your pine, cedar, redwood, spruce, and fir. These are the traditional building timbers of our barns and outbuildings. If you are dealing with a true hardwood, like seasoned white oak or hickory, you will rarely see a carpenter bee hole, because the wood is simply too dense for their jaws. If you do find holes in an old oak sill, they are likely the work of a completely different pest, like the powder post beetle. And this powder and steel wool method will not reach them, because their tunnels are as small as pencil leads and number in the hundreds. Second, understand the limitation of structural integrity. If you walk into your barn and find that a major plate beam or a main rafter has been riddled with holes every spring for 30 years, the inside of that timber looks like a sponge. My grandfather's method will kill the bees inside those channels, and the steel wool will stop new ones from entering those specific doors, but it will not restore the strength of the tree. A hollow beam is a dangerous beam. If the wood has lost its structural core, you must put down the powder duster and pick up a carpenter's saw. You cannot patch your way out of a collapsing roof. Third, look at the limit of accessibility and scale. If you have a standard porch post, a deck rail, or the lower eaves of a wagon shed, you can stand on your own 2 feet, look the wood in the eye, and treat every single hole with care. The old way requires precision. You must find every entrance. But if you own a massive 3-story bank barn and the infestation is 40 feet in the air at the very peak of the gable where the wind has stripped the paint away, a handheld duster and a putty knife will not save you unless you have the scaffolding and the time to reach every square inch. If an infestation is massive and completely out of physical reach, the honest truth is that simple hand tools cannot defend what you cannot touch. And lastly, remember that this remedy is entirely passive once the holes are sealed. It relies on maintenance. If you plug 15 holes this October but leave the rest of the board bare, dry, and gray, the bees will simply fly 3 inches to the left next May and begin a 16th hole. The steel wool protects the old tunnel, but only the paintbrush protects the rest of the structure. If you are a person who wants to apply a remedy once and forget about your buildings for the next 20 years, this method is not for you. It requires a watchful eye. It belongs to the person who walks his fence lines every autumn and touches up his oil every few seasons. So, look at your wood with a clear eye. If your timbers are still strong, if you can reach the work safely, and if you are willing to keep up with the oil and the paint, then the old people's way will save your beams and keep your money in your pocket. But if the wood is already crumbling in your hand, or if the damage is hidden behind finished walls where you cannot see the stains, do not deceive yourself. Acknowledge the limit, understand the material, and act according to the reality of the structure. How exactly do we tell if a beam is still structurally sound, or if it has crossed that line into total ruin? That is a matter of a simple pocket knife test, and it is the very first thing we must do before we decide to defend a timber or replace it entirely. Look around this old barn structure. The hemlock beams overhead are square-ruled, chopped by an adze out of timber that was standing before this nation was formed. The mortise and tenon joints are held together by wooden pins, trunnels, we call them, driven home by a wooden mallet nearly 2 centuries ago. When you stand in a place like this, you realize that you do not really own a piece of land or an old building. You are just the tenant for a little while. You are the one whose turn it is to keep the roof tight, keep the foundation dry, and keep the wood from turning back into soil. The method I have shown you over these past minutes did not begin with my grandfather, nor did it begin in Lancaster County. When the German-speaking people left the Rhine Valley and the Palatinate in the 18th and 19th centuries, they brought a deep, almost religious reverence for timber framing, a tradition they called fachwerk. Wood was scarce in the old country. Every forest belonged to a prince or a duke, and a peasant could be hanged for cutting a green oak. When they arrived here and found a sea of virgin forest, they did not waste it. They built to endure. In the old farm ledgers preserved in our historical societies, notebooks written in the old German script from the 1850s and 1860s, you find the clear footprints of this work. A farmer named Christian Stoltzfus kept a diary of his chores just a few miles from where I sit. In an entry from May of 1862, he wrote about spending 3 days whittling Small's hickory pegs, dipping them in pine tar, and driving them into the bee-holes on the sunny gable of his wagon shed. Before industrial steel wool was cheap and abundant, the old people used what they had on the farm, tightly twisted horsehair from the mane of a draft horse, packed into the throat of the tunnel and soaked in hot linseed oil. The principle was exactly the same as our modern steel wool. The tough, coarse horsehair would bind up in the mandibles of the bee, preventing them from clearing the passage, while the oil hardened the surrounding grain. As the years moved into the 20th century, formal science began to catch up with what the farmers had practiced for generations. In the early 1900s, the United States Department of Agriculture realized that the rapid decay of rural barns was costing the country millions of dollars in stored grain and lost livestock. They began printing the farmers' bulletins, plain, paper-covered booklets sent out by the thousands to rural post offices. If you look at USDA Farmers Bulletin, number 472, printed back in the 20s, or the early circulars from the Pennsylvania Agricultural Experiment Station, you will see the exact confirmation of our traditional craft. The old entomologists wrote it out in the dry language of the State Extension Office, noting that mechanical exclusion by means of dense barriers, followed by immediate sealing of the entrance gallery, remains the only permanent remedy against the recurring degradation of seasoned structural timbers by wood-boring apiaries. Understand this. Modern university extensions, from Penn State to Ohio State, still publish bulletins every spring that say the exact same thing. Their laboratory tests confirm that while a carpenter bee can easily shred the natural fibers of a seasoned pine board, its jaws have zero mechanical leverage against hardened metal mesh. The science has not changed because the bee has not changed, and the wood has not changed. The only thing that changed was our willingness to slow down and do the work with our own hands instead of buying a quick fix in a pressurized can. Why do we pay a company every year for a problem we can settle ourselves with a handful of wire and Paintbrush. How did we become a people who believe that every solution must come from a store or a laboratory? Stop and think about that. Self-sufficiency is not about living in the past, and it is not about rejecting the modern world just for the sake of being stubborn. It is about understanding that the best answer is often the simplest one, and that the knowledge tested by 5 generations of farmers is worth more than a monthly invoice from a corporate service. So, I invite you to take up this craft yourself. Tomorrow morning, when you finish your coffee, do not just walk past your porch rails or your shed walls. Stop. Look low for those yellow-brown tobacco stains. Put your ear to the gray wood and listen for that faint rhythmic rasping. If you find a hole, do not run to the telephone or panic. Go to your shop, get your powder or your oil, find a bit of steel wool, and mix up your filler. Treat the tunnel with care. Give it its proper 2 days of patience. Pack that metal plug deep into the throat of the opening, and smooth the patch flush with your knife. Then, take your brush and finish the wood so there is nothing left for them to want. It is a small thing, perhaps, repairing a single hole in an old board. But it is in these small, quiet acts of maintenance that we keep our footing in this world. When you work with the grain of the wood, using the old knowledge, you are joining a long line of men and women who looked after their property with dignity and foresight. You are telling the future that you cared enough about the shelter over your head to tend it properly. My grandfather's hand is on the beams I use every single day in this barn. The reason these timbers still stand square and true after all these years is not that he had some secret magical power. It is simply that he knew the bees wanted bare wood, and he made sure they never found any on his watch. That is the whole craft of it. Not trying to wipe out everything that flies, but understanding what a thing wants, and quiet.